Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Parents' Rights under IDEA in Education, presented by the Freddie Ford Family Foundation. My name is Felicia Ford, and I am the president and founder of the Freddie Ford Family Foundation. Today, our featured speaker is Jade Kiser of Kiser Advocacy and Consulting, and she is going to be doing the presentation today. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat, and please stay muted. So Jade, let's go ahead and get started.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. We are going to be talking about parental rights under IDEA. I want to do a quick introduction. My name is Jade Kiser. I'm the owner and founder of Kiser Educational Consulting and Advocacy based out of St. Louis. I have been operating KECA for 1 year in October. I'm still a full-time classroom teacher, but I'm in the process of switching over to helping parents understand their rights and focusing more on parents and families of children with disabilities in the home and in the community as opposed to educational sectors. So all of the research that I've pulled today and the information that I have was pulled directly from the legislation IDEA. I don't recommend reading it unless you want some very boring nighttime reading. However, it is very informational. And so I'm going to get started here. And like Felicia said, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to drop them into the chat box and we will make sure to answer them towards the end. Felicia, if any questions pop up that are relevant to the section that we're on, please don't hesitate to stop me so we can talk about them right then. So IDEA was previously known as the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act, and it's currently the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. So the last major review was in 2004. There have been some minor reviews since then, but the last major change was in 2004. IDEA is broken down into 4 parts. So Part A, general provisions, Part B, special education services, Part C, early intervention services, and Part D, national activities to improve education of children with disabilities. So the 4 parts, this is just a nice way if you're looking for something in the legislation to know which section it covers. So early intervention would be birth to pre-K, so your first steps, your preschool. And then special education services would be everything from kindergarten to age 21. So the guiding principles of IDEA were to make sure that all children, no matter their ability, have access to a free and appropriate public education, otherwise known as FAPE. So you might see the acronym FAPE or hear FAPE, and that's just what people are referring to, free and appropriate public education. The next is the Individualized Education Plan, or the IEP, access to appropriate evaluations, least restrictive environment, otherwise known as LRE, parent participation, and procedural safeguards. So today we're just going to cover the basics and the procedural safeguards so you know your rights as a parent anytime you walk into an IEP meeting, anytime you walk into an evaluation meeting, or anytime you're contacted maybe for something else regarding your child and their disability, potentially a manifestation determination or anything of that nature. So we have 5 rights that we're going to cover today. The first one being access to educational records. And so as a parent, you might wonder what would be in your child's educational file. And these files should include any IEPs, evaluations, parent contact logs, and disciplinary actions. Each file should also have a log that shows who has seen that file and who has taken it into their possession and brought it back. So kind of a check-in, check-out system. And then depending on your school district, these files might be housed in the school building that your child attends or another district office. So as your child gets older, depending on their disability and any behavioral or disciplinary actions, the folder might grow large and you might acquire a large file of your own with your child's IEP and other information. So at any time, if you misplace an IEP, or an evaluation maybe from years prior, you can always request access to your child's educational records and gain access to that information. So it's always kind of the good thing to know is even if you lose the IEP from 2 years ago, but it had something in it you really liked or you needed to refer to, you can always get access to it. You can always request that. It's always best to request anything in writing. So I always recommend writing a email or a typed up letter and mailing it to the district office, the special education coordinator, or your child's teacher, and they can pass it off to the right person. All right, the next one is right to participate in meetings. And so prior to each IEP, school districts should send you a notice of meeting. Those of you who are virtual right now, those notice of meetings are coming in via email, but typically it would either be sent home with your child or maybe mailed. The notice should be given out at least 10 days prior to the meeting unless you have waived that. So there are times when sometimes dates slip by or they need to have the IEP immediately, and so they might call and ask you if you want to waive your 10-day notification of a meeting, and that's totally up to you. The reason that IDEA states that 10 days is the meeting notice should be given prior to 10 days is to allow the parent time to prepare. So if it were going to be a rather hot and heavy IEP meeting, there might be some large discussions happening about different changes. You know, as a parent, you might want to have an advocate or a lawyer depending on the situation. And then even if it's just a general IEP meeting, you want to have time to get your questions together and to go through the old IEP and see what you liked, didn't like, or what wasn't working. And so that's why there's a 10-day notice. But if you feel comfortable ever waiving the 10-day notice, you can always do that. It's totally a personal preference and a situational preference as well. So with that said, the right to participate in meetings also gives you the right to bring anybody you would like to the meeting. So maybe grandma is another primary caretaker, or maybe an aunt or a nanny. I know when I was a nanny, I actually went to the IEP of the child that I nannied. And so you can bring anybody that you want into the meeting, whether it be an advocate, a lawyer, or another family member, and you just have to give the district permission to share information in front of them. But you are allowed to bring anybody you want, including an outside service provider or therapist. All right, number 3, so the right to receive prior written notice. So prior written notice this is kind of where things get tricky, depending on what prior written notice is given for. So typically at the close of an IEP meeting, you've probably been given a piece of paper and maybe even asked to sign the paper, and that outlines the proposed changes to your child's IEP. This is just a formal way of sharing the changes that were made during the IEP cycle, but it also explains how you can, when you want it implemented. So you can check a box and say you want those changes implemented the very next day, or you can go ahead and you can wait out the 10 days until those changes go into effect. So typically when we have an IEP meeting, say we hold it on the 10th, those changes in that IEP meeting would not go into effect until the 20th, unless the parent signs off and there's an agreement between the parent and the team that those new changes would be implemented the next day or the next school day. So prior written notice is very important when there's major changes being made to the IEP. So some things that should always have prior written notice. Melissa, I see your question. I will hop back to you in just a second, okay? So there are some things that are going to require prior written notice, and there are some things that aren't. So changing goals, that's not going to require a prior written notice, but changing the amount of services your child gets, that's going to require a prior written notice, as is changing their least restrictive environment. So say your child is currently spending 60% of their day in a special education setting, and say you have increased minutes for general education time, and now they're only spending 50% in special education, that has changed their least restrictive environment. And so there should always be a notice of action or a prior written notice for that. So some other things that would require prior written notice would be the first time a child receives extended school year services, the first time a child receives any new service, so any new related service, any new academic service, any time that a behavior plan is put in place, anytime there's going to be evaluation testing done, and then again, changing that least restrictive environment. So those are kind of the big things that require that prior written notice. So if your child's school is currently virtual, you've probably been asked to do an amendment for Form G if you're in the state of Missouri. If you're outside of the state of Missouri, I'm sure it's called something different. But here in Missouri, Form G would also require a prior written notice since it's being newly added to the IEP. And so with that, that's going to have an amendment and then a prior written notice or a notice of action. So Melissa, is there amount of time that is understood to receive a draft copy of the IEP before the IEP meeting? So Melissa, technically under IDEA, parents can request a draft, but the school district does not always provide a draft. So if a draft is something you would like, I would recommend getting with your child's case manager and getting access to that and having something set up between the two of you. I know that a lot of districts don't do draft IEPs depending on where you're at, just because the idea of the IEP is that it's supposed to be drafted together as a team at the IEP meeting. That's not to say that districts won't give you a draft copy, but I do know that a lot of districts are moving towards the fact that the IEP should not be drafted before the meeting and that the IEP should be drafted together as a team. So Melissa, I would just say if you are wanting a draft copy of the IEP, I would write an email or type up a letter and mail it to your child's teacher, the child's building principal, or special education director, and ask for a draft IEP. And then you can kind of put in there, you can say, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, I would like to have access to a draft IEP prior to the meeting. I would like it 3 days before the meeting." Most districts are probably not going to give it to you any sooner than 3 to 5 days before the meeting. And that's just as teachers, we're trying to get everything ready and prepared as much as possible, but sometimes the IEP, especially requiring, if somebody wants a full draft, requiring it more than 5 days in advance could be a lot to ask, especially right now of a teacher, on top of all of their other responsibilities. But you can request a draft. I would just say ask for it 3 to 5 days. So there's not a general time that's acceptable, just because not all districts give them out, and a draft is not required to be given to parents by IDEA. So 3 to 5 days is totally acceptable. And just I'd keep those requests in writing just so you have documentation for that. All right. So 4 is the right to consent. So most of the time when you're consenting in special education, you are consenting to getting initial evaluation or reevaluation, and then initial IEP or special education services. So with that, you always have the right to consent or deny consent on any changes to your child's IEP and to any testing. So if multiple changes are made, you can always agree with some changes and disagree with others. For example, if the district proposes a change to your child's goals that you agree with but proposes to decrease service minutes, you can consent to the change of goals but not consent to the change of service minutes. However, depending on whether or not you consent to that, some things can still be done if you've given initial consent for services. So right to consent and that prior written notice is where things get a little bit tricky sometimes. You can always request that there's data to support the decision. So if you don't agree with the fact that they're trying to dismiss a related service or decrease service minutes, you can always request that the data that supports that. So that could be grades, that could be attendance, it could be behavioral data, it could be academic data that shows you that the team is wanting to do what's best for the child. And so you want to make sure that there's data to support all of those decisions. So with that said, this is part of the written notice and part of the right to consent. So that prior written notice and consent kind of go hand in hand. And on the written notice, it always asks the district to list the factors considered. And so if one of the factors considered is data, you have a right to see data. And then if one of the factors considered is parent input, and say you deny consent, I would ask for that to be taken out, because if they are continuing with that decision, you're not giving your input for that decision to be removed. So it's very important to read kind of that prior written notice. I know a lot of times parents just think they have to sign it. That's not the case. You can also take it, decide not to sign it at the meeting, and you have 10 days to sign it if you need to sign it. So that's why, like I said earlier, if you have an IEP meeting on the 10th, typically those services are implemented on the 20th. That gives the parent 10 days to decide if they want to agree or disagree if they weren't sure at the IEP meeting. So it's also very important that if there's something you are unsure about, you have the right to take that IEP home, call a consultant or an advocate, or talk to other parents who've been through the same situation and gather what you feel or what you think about that change. And then you can go back. You don't have to agree right away with what the district is saying. So you do have time. You don't have to implement it the next day. You don't have to feel pressured to sign anything. If you go home and you decide that you are okay with that change and you want to sign it for immediate action, for immediate implementation, you can do that. But don't ever feel pressured like you have to sign something at the meeting. And so along with right to consent also goes the right to disagree. So within a right to disagree, you also have the right to appeal decisions made by the team and the district. So the right to disagree, while educators are professionals in their field, as your child's parent, you are their advocate and you have the right to disagree with choices they make regarding your child's IEP, evaluation, or manifestation determination. There are times when districts and parents are unable to come to an agreement, and that's fine. They're both fighting for two different interests. While it is the interest of your child, you're fighting for the interest of your whole child, and the school is typically fighting for the educational well-being of them. And sometimes those two things don't always seem to align. While everybody typically means well, that does not mean that you don't have a right as a parent to disagree or appeal the decision. And so if you disagree at any time during the meeting, you can always table the meeting. If you do not like something that's being said, if you do not like what's happening in the meeting, you have a right to stop the meeting at any time and reconvene. That would give you time to get access to an advocate or a lawyer or whatever you felt was needed to put that meeting back on the right track. And you can also request mediation, due process, or file a complaint. So those requesting mediation is typically the first step. They bring in a mediator, and then due process is taking it a little further, where you're filing a complaint and you're asking the state to review the changes that are being made and the disagreement that the parent and the district are having. So if you disagree with decisions or you're concerned with the implementation, you can request an IEP at any time. So if your child has an IEP and they're on month 6 of their IEP, and you start to feel like there's not progress being made and you don't agree with some of the things that are happening right now, maybe your child's had some major changes, you can always request an IEP at any time to review that IEP, make the necessary changes. And depending on how many changes are made, it might just be a small amendment, or it might be an entire new IEP, depending on what the district and you decide. So if you believe your concerns are not appropriately addressed, again, that would bring you back to that mediation, due process, file a complaint, and things like that. And so this is just kind of a brief overview of what is in the procedural safeguards. And yes, facilitation would be the same as mediation. So basically facilitation and mediation, they're just bringing somebody else in that's an unbiased, non-biased party that would be able to mediate or facilitate some of those IEPs that do get very heated very quickly. And so I think that they're the same thing, they're just different words. The legality part of IDEA says mediation, but facilitation would be exactly the same thing, Melissa. Absolutely. Thank you for asking. So here are some quick links. So procedural safeguards, rights law. If you haven't already used rights law before, I would highly recommend reading up on this. In fact, Melissa, I'm going to put this link in the chat box for you because this is a very good link as far as rights for parents of children who have an IEP. And so rights law is a good one. And then this is Parent Center Hub talking about rights and federal regulations. And now with virtual learning, things are a bit different as far as how services are being implemented. And in the last webinar, I talked about offering a little bit of flexibility and understanding during that time, just because it is a weird time for everybody. And then, oh, that's a PDF. So this is the full procedural safeguards PDF. I believe I got this from the Department of Education website. So it is just Part B. So if you're looking in IDEA and you're looking for procedural safeguards, you would want to be looking for Part B of the legislation. All right. So this was a very quick, very brief overview of your rights as a parent of a child with an IEP. So just to review, your child has a right to free and appropriate public education, a right to least restrictive environment. You as a parent have a right to access their educational records, participate in all meetings, receive prior written notice or notice of action for any changes in your child's evaluation, any changes in your child's IEP. You have the right to consent and the right to disagree with the district. So you have a right to give consent or deny consent. Then you have a right to disagree, which could lead to stopping an IEP meeting, mediation, facilitation, due process, or complaint. So hopping back to that right to disagree really quick, it's important that if you're disagreeing that you have lots of documentation and evidence. So I always encourage parents to keep a file folder, a binder, a file box, whatever, float your boat full of any written documentation that has been given to you by districts. And one thing I did not mention was that these procedural safeguards, you have to get access to yearly. So your child's school should be offering you a copy of the procedural safeguards yearly. I know some schools email them out, some schools hand them out, but you should be getting access to this document yearly. You have a right to reject if it's a paper copy and say, oh no, my child's in 10th grade, I have 10 copies of these. You can absolutely reject it, but they do have to be offered to you. So if you want to go more in depth with procedural rights, parental safeguards, your rights as a parent, get access to templates to help you disagree, to help you communicate with the school district, I am launching my Kiser Advocacy Framework course on November 20th. So it's a self-guided course. Lessons are 30 minutes or less, a lot like this. It includes 8 templates so far. I'm still working on more. And then you get lifetime access. So basically it's about 6 sections right now. And there's just 30-minute videos, 1 or 2 30-minute videos that can be listened to in the car while you're doing dishes, while you're on a walk, whatever you're doing. And they're going more in depth over how to keep documentation for your child for if you ever disagree, how to keep, how to write and communicate with the school district to have evidence for, services and service changes or service requests you might have for your child. And it goes in depth on how to advocate for your child and how to understand IDEA so you can use it in your best interest and you make sure your school district is following IDEA. And so it's a self-guided course that's going to teach you the ins and outs of IDEA that you need to know as a parent and that you need to be aware of to be the best advocate for your child that you can be. So I'm really excited about this course. I've been working on it for a long time because IDEA is a very long piece of legislature, but I wanted to make sure I got through it so I could provide the most important information to you as parents in the right format. And so since I'm in pre-launch and we're doing this webinar series and I have a couple other promotions, you can use the code LAUNCH at bit.ly Kiser course for 20% off. And so it's a nice little savings. It's only until the end of November, but it's a great way to get access to templates to help you communicate with your child's school, templates that will help you to request files that will allow you to request information, request meetings, request evaluations, and a basic just general communication that outlines everything you should be putting in every communication with your child's teacher or their administrator. So that is all I have. Melissa, do you have any questions? Or Felicia, do you have any questions before we hop off here? I know that's a lot of information in a rather short amount of time, but I wanted to keep it short and sweet on this Saturday. And so if we have any questions, I'm more than happy to take those.
Melissa, you can feel free to unmute yourself, or if you need me to do it, that's fine. Jade.
Sorry, I just wanted the background noise down because my kids were here earlier, but I wanted to know about the templates. Are they for all of the age groups, all of the age spans? Because I have a 4-year-old and I have twin 8-year-olds, and so I kind of feel like I'm always like divided between what resources I need to like link into.
Yeah, so the templates are created for, I will pull it up here. I have a list of the ones I've done so far. Hold on, now I lost my Zoom, sorry. So the Kiser Advocacy Framework, let's see. So it's got 8 templates right now. And so it's going to give you a SPED acronym sheet, how to request testing, request for IEPs, written request for disagreeing with notice of action, requesting access to your child's educational and behavioral records, request for additional copies of the IEP, request for IEP or evaluation to be sent to outside service providers, and then general communication for clarifications or concerns. And so I developed these so they could be used in first steps into that transition of 21 years old. So these are just basic outlines to help parents write these and make sure they have the correct information in each email or in each letter to just kind of show and refer that this is my child, this is their date of birth, this is their student number, and this is my concern, this is why it's my concern, or this is what I'm requesting, this is why I'm requesting it, and then your contact information. And then I also put in there like what you could cite in the procedural safeguards or in IDEA if you were requesting or disagreeing with something and you needed that legislature to back you up. So that's kind of the whole basis of the templates for me. A lot of the questions and calls that I get in my Facebook group or from clients are, I don't know what to write to the school district. So I created these templates so they could be used for anybody with any age that would need to communicate with the school on either a positive or maybe a not so positive basis. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Also, do you happen to do you have a mailing list or like a newsletter that I can sign up for
Yes.
like future things or?
Absolutely. And I actually have, I'll send you the link. I have one for an IEP meeting note taker. So I created an IEP note taker for parents to use at IEP meetings to kind of prepare ahead of time and then to give them a spot to take notes during the meeting, because a lot of information is given during the IEP meeting. And so I created an IEP note taker for parents to just help them ask the questions that they think of before that they might forget during the meeting. So I will send you the, I'll put this in the chat, Melissa, and then you can use that and it will send you any, it will start you on a couple newsletters that I've sent out, and then it will send you any updated newsletters as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Do you have any other questions or thoughts? Or, I mean, I'm still developing templates. Or are there any templates that you're like, oh man, I've needed this at one point?
Off the top of my head, I think the ones that I'm struggling with right now is getting my son from his 504 to his IEP plan. I don't agree with the assessment, and there are several assessments that I think they probably should have done to really hone in on my bigger concerns, which are kind of abstract, like his executive functioning skills that I don't believe were fully tested. And the issue basically, I'll tell you, is that we're having is he has significant behaviors at home, but because he doesn't let the school staff know about them because he doesn't want to be singled out in his peer group, they're saying it's completely irrelevant to his educational environment. And unfortunately, I said to them, I can't even understand how that would stand in a world we're doing virtual learning at this time, since he's at home learning. And, you know, he said, I'm sorry, I just can't make an argument for an IEP for your son, even though he has a documented disability and a 504 plan. So I think having some way to organize all of my, you know, thoughts, which are numerous, and, you know, I'm kind of learning as I go through this process. I wouldn't even know where to really begin. So something maybe to help me organize those things, or a template that would help me respectfully disagree, because like you said, sometimes you get very emotionally charged because it's your child, it's your most important investment. So, you know, I don't think that, you know, you can always separate your emotions from, you know, your professionalism as a parent.
No, it's hard. You're not that, and like, you're not the only one. Like, I totally get that. I mean, so like I said, I went to an IEP meeting with the parent that I nannied for, and her child had severe autism. I worked with them for years. I'm still very, very close to the family. And, you know, I'll never forget sitting in that meeting, and it gave me a very unique perspective of being in an IEP meeting and listening to this. I mean, there was like 12 people in this meeting, listening to them talk about this person that you love so much, and not always the best light. And well, we know our kids have struggles, and I mean, this young man was like my little brother. So I mean, I would do anything for him. And I'll just never forget sitting there feeling like that, and feel like that's one of the driving moments that changed me as an educator, to be able to really empathize with parents that are in that situation, no matter whether the meeting is just a typical IEP meeting or a rather emotionally charged one. I would just never forget sitting there and these people talking about this little boy that I just loved so much, and they didn't see what I saw, because they were looking somewhere totally different than I was. And it was not their fault. They were doing their job, but it was hard, and I wanted to, I get it. Even though it's not my own child, I get where parents are coming from when they say emotions run high, because they do. And like you said, that's your child. That's your, like, that is your baby. You want to do everything for them. And so I think that was when I created these templates and created this program, it was solely for everybody to have access to communicate with the district appropriately, because I've seen as an educator, the more parents come in a specific manner, the quicker they get what they want, or the more likely they are to get what they want. I have noticed that if parents come in, horns, you know, guns blazing, horns coming out, like, I have noticed that districts are going to be very less likely to get on it. Where if parents come in an informative manner with, like, I'm citing this legislation because I know this is my right, districts are like, okay, well, she knows her stuff. She came in professionally. They're going to be more apt to help parents. That's not right or wrong on the parents or the district. I think it's just human nature. We're all more willing to help somebody who comes to us with data, information, reason, and is reasonable and logical, than somebody who is emotionally charged. And so I definitely think that is my goal for this whole program, was to give that to parents so they can step back, so they can still be emotionally charged and feeling all the feelings, but write in a manner that is going to get them further ahead. And so you said a template to disagree, and I'm going to write that down, because I think that's a perfect one, that I can change up one of the ones that I have, but I think that's a perfect one to put in there.
Yeah, I think, like, even what I haven't seen a lot of is parent concern letter templates, because they can vary. Like, you know, my concern isn't necessarily the same as, say, my aunt's, who also has a son in special education. Her concerns are much more different than what I'm looking at. He's got a lot of, you know, math and reading problems. He's got more disabilities. And I think it's hard, again, being able to organize those thoughts. And if it's a parent concern letter, I feel like that's your avenue to professionally communicate your emotional investment there. But it's also not going to be received, like you said, if you go in there and like, I don't like, I rejected, I hate, or I feel. They're not going to get you what you need. What's going to get you what you need is saying like, here is what we did. Here's what did not work. Here is what we're suggesting as an evidence-based intervention for our child. Because I feel like, you know, I work as a nurse normally. And when I talk to doctors, I can never tell them, you need to order this test, you need to do this way, and it's got to work out this, you know, this is what we want as our result. And I frame it all out for him and I can do everything. That's not going to get me what I want. What I need to do is say, you know, what would be a really great suggestion is if we tried an evidence-based approach that would work on these specific disability, you know, that whole thing, like stroking egos sometimes, because
Yes.
it's so hard because, you know, you're just the expert on your child. And like you said, I agree that there's not always an emphasis on the holistic person. Sometimes the teachers, the administrators, they're limited in their ability to do that holistically. Like I said, it's like doesn't get to be overall until like they're 14 and they're transitioning, and then we'll talk about whether or not they can use a microwave or live independently or tie their shoes. And even though right now, you know, I'm concerned why my son can't tie his shoes, it's not necessarily something that requires him to get special education or attention like that. So
Right.
that's really hard too.
Oh, absolutely. And so one of the things I do have in there is a parent communication template, and part of it is communicating concerns. And so, because I definitely agree, I think, you know, even as a teacher, I mean, I'm lucky to have a very small group of children. I run an autism program. So I'm lucky to have a very small group of children, so I can be very close to their families because I have them year after year. And so typically if there's something they don't like or don't agree with, it's a very casual, open dialogue. But I know that that's not always the case. I know that I have a very unique approach to parent relationships, just because I have sat on the side of a table with a parent of somebody that I love with autism, and it really changes your perspective as an educator. And so I know I have a unique perspective, and I know I have a unique relationship with my students' parents. And so that's why I thought it was important to create a template. So if there wasn't quite that closeness of a teacher that your child's had for 3 years, because maybe your child is getting a new teacher every year and you have to rebuild that relationship every year, having a general way to communicate with your child's teacher that just covers what you need to talk about, and not some of the emotionally charged things that can come out, like we were saying, so the parent communication concern is just, this is who my child is. This is their student number. If you're on a big district, this is their birthday, depending on if you're requesting something. This is their teacher. This is what I am concerned about. This is why I'm concerned about it. And then, of course, the ego stroke. Thank you for everything you've done. I look forward to hearing from you. And then, of course, your name and contact information. And so, but I do think that it's important with, especially right now, teachers are going through a lot, and it's important to address your concerns of your child 100%, but it's also important to recognize that the person on the other end is a human. And so they are trying to do, typically teachers are trying to do what they think is best for your child. They're not trying to work against you. So I think that, just always thanking them, even if it's a kind of a petty, sassy, thanks for your time, thanks for getting back to me. I think it does go a little bit farther, just because most of the time parents are coming at us guns blazing. And so it's nice to just have somebody who can appropriately tell us their concerns or their disagreements before jumping to conclusions or whatever.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna look at those links.
So I would say, as a parent, it is incredibly challenging to find that comfort level that you need to address the IEP meetings and everyone involved. So for me, I have three on the spectrum. So what I do is I try to build a rapport with the teacher from day one, introduce myself, make sure I stay in communication as much as possible. But mine are still younger. I'm not sure how that's going to look when they get older and they have multiple teachers. But right now in second grade and kindergarten, it's a lot easier. But man, you go into those meetings and it's uncomfortable. I know everyone. We've been talking. I get more of the compassionate staff so far because mine are still little. But yours are what? You said your twins are 8?
Yeah, no, they're the same. They're in second grade. They were born in October, so they have to be back a year because they weren't 5 by September 1st.
Okay.
So they are second grade, and then the other one is 4. So we just got the intent to register, and we're going to keep him in early intervention right now, because he has a lot of very high level needs on the spectrum at a level 3, which makes me a full-time services coordinator for my household.
Yes, and that struggle is significant, and it's really hard. Like you said, being emotionally charged. You're coming at it from we're at this all day, every day with our children, and we know who they are, and so we're really not ready to deal with nonsense, if you will, what we think is nonsense, because some things they're serious to us, and we need to make sure we build, like I said, build relationships and try to finesse, because we finesse egos all the time, and you really don't want to, but the reality is, you get more done with, where they say honey than vinegar. We have to, for the benefit of our children, we have to present ourselves in a way that is palatable and does not cause people to be defensive. So
I have an amazing mentor from the ARC, and he basically said, your job is to build a good relationship at your school. And I was like, what? What?
Yeah.
Oh, it just took me so off guard. I've had some really unbelievable poor experiences with like when I put a helmet on my son and I find out, except for in the progress notes the morning before my IEP meeting. And I was just like floored by it. I was crying. My advocate said, okay, that's fine. It's really, really hurtful and it's really upsetting. Pull it together, because you have an IEP meeting, and going in there full of tears and all that is not going to help your son. You can cry afterwards. We can cry together afterwards. I was like, okay. So, yeah, it's been pretty difficult. But Elwyn in Philadelphia is pretty notoriously known for having situations like that occur frequently.
Now, what you cut out a little bit, what did you find out?
That they wanted to put a helmet on my son, but I didn't even know that was a concern.
Oh.
That was that I read.
Yeah. Okay, I could see where that would take you to a place you weren't ready for right before your meeting.
that was my son's first IEP meeting after our initial ER evaluation. So yeah, that's what I walked into, and I was just like, thank God I had gotten an advocate. We still keep in touch with my son's speech from 0 to 3, and she told me, here's your person, give her a call, she's going to help you, and she has, and she's amazing. She's taken me under her wing, and she gives me every single guidance I can possibly imagine, which is invaluable. Like, really, she is just an amazing expert on what to me seems like everything, but I love having her available in every instance. She offers, if she doesn't, she tells me where to go get it, but I feel like it's a lot of self-study for a lot of this stuff, and it's like almost like playing catch up, because I never knew about any of this stuff. Like my kids were diagnosed all in 1 year, so it was it was like 1 year we're a normal family, the next year we were all autism, and it was like, how did this happen? This is crazy. And really rocked our world. But thank God, I was just like, I kind of had a feeling something was off between my kids. I just knew early. And once I was like, listen, I don't care. We can all just like deal with this and hold hands later. But I need an action plan to help them, because I can't take the not knowing and the inability to move forward for them, because my experience as a nurse, even though it has nothing to do with what, the IDEA or ADA or, a lot of the stuff that we're confronted with now, it's enough that I know there's a short amount of time that I can catch them up and get them where they need to be. And I just kind of pushed forward with urgency, really.
That's exactly how it goes. It's one day life is, just life, and then you get your diagnosis, and then it shifts just because now you have to figure out where to go, what information is available, what do you need to do, what does this store need. So it's almost like you put your autism business hat on and you got to go to work, because no one hands you this information. It says, here, parents of an autistic child, we've got you. No, you have to find all your services. You have to figure out where's the right place to get support. So it's incredibly challenging. And Jade, I wanted to come back to you and ask you, how do we prepare for an IEP meeting? Is there any particular questions we should be looking at to ask, or any information that we need to compile to make sure that we're getting all the information and we can be as productive as possible to benefit our children?
Yeah, so I will share this IEP note taker that I created. And it's kind of the freebie that people get when they join my mailing list. And so I thought long and hard about what parents would need to know or should know, or what they really need to walk away from their meeting knowing. And so I came up with this for like this first part here would be filling out during the meeting, but down here, kind of my questions. So this is what I always tell parents to do: write down your questions before the meeting, because you get in that meeting, there's a lot of people, and even if you know them and even if you have great relationships, it's still kind of this like intimidating feeling as the parent. And so I always tell parents, write down your questions before you walk in. If you have any data from outside therapies, I tell parents, bring any data from outside therapies, any like the latest doctor's visit, kind of what happened, if there were any medicine changes, if there have been any major life changes. Be prepared to tell the team about that, because if the team has seen a major like decline in academic growth and maybe a spike in behaviors, and let's say that there was a death in the family or there was a change in the home, somebody moved in, somebody moved out, that could explain a lot of that to the team. And then, so questions and concerns, this is what I always tell parents, fill out before the meeting. Fill out questions and concerns, bring any data that maybe even you have or data from outside therapists, and then have it all written down, because like I said, once you get into that meeting, there's a chance that you're going to forget, and it's just a lot of information. And so those are kind of the big things. Write down your questions, write down your concerns, take any data that you have from any outside therapist or yourself, and then just have it all written down. Oh, and then anything from the latest doctor's appointments.
For written notice, I've heard that they can implement after on the 11th day.
Yes.
If there's a chance that I don't know, had the house burnt down or something like that, and I get back to them on like day 12 or 13, is that like, I don't know, is that a possibility, or is it that nope, I'd missed the time frame, or whatever.
So you technically would miss the time frame, and they'd have to reconvene another IEP meeting. So yeah, so I mean, it depends on, you know, what your thoughts were after that time or whatever. If you know, maybe you came across new data, or you came across new information from somebody, you know, I would just call and say, look, like, you know, I thought that I was okay with this, but after reading this, I'm not. Can I request a meeting? And, you know, you can request a full IEP team meeting, or you could request an amendment meeting, whichever you preferred. And depending on what the changes were, if it was one change, an amendment would probably be okay. But if it was a change that was going to make several other large changes, so like if you were increasing service minutes, that would change least restrictive environment, that might require a new IEP. But I mean, if it doesn't matter if it's month 4 and you're like, this isn't working, I don't like this anymore, you can always request an IEP meeting.
Had any difficulty with like no, we talked about like building relationships with the teachers, and every single year I send here's a little bit about me, what works, what doesn't work, almost kind of, I didn't realize, but I essentially create like a small vision statement for each kid that I give to their teachers. But I found it like really difficult to connect this year because there was no face-to-face teacher conference. Everything is virtual. Everything, unfortunately for me, keeps going to my spam box because I get so many emails from the school. It automatically believes it's like a spam or a news blast or whatever, and everything is going to spam, even if I add them to my address book and everything. And, you know, Gmail has no support. So I found it like difficult or extremely challenging to be able to connect with them so that my kids are significant or in the forefront of their thought process anytime that they're trying, you know, something new. And I know all of it's new for everybody. So I'm just wondering if there was a technique or if there was something you did that was really, really helpful or impactful.
So I can say as a teacher, honestly, just like I never mind if parents reach out to me and say, hey, how's my child doing in class? You know, like I said, I have a small group of kids, so it's very easy for me to, and all my parents have my phone number, which I know is can be a hot button for some teachers, but I have 6 kids. That means I have 6 parents. If 6 parents have my phone number, it is what it is. But I did use Class Dojo for a long time, and I never minded if parents just said, hey, how's my kid doing? Is there anything I can do to help my kid in school? Is there anything I can do to help you help my kid, basically? You know, as teachers, especially right now, we really enjoy the parents that are taking that responsibility and understanding that because we aren't in school, we can only make your child do so much through a computer. And so I think right now, I think that is probably the best thing I can say is, hey, like, I'm so-and-so's mom. I just wanted to check in. How's everything going? How is he doing in school? What can I do at home to help support you with his academic work or whatever? You know, gen ed teachers have a lot more kids and resource teachers have a lot more kids to keep track of. So sometimes when parents reach out to us, it makes our job a little easier just because they're coming to us. And so then that puts it in the forefront of our mind, like, oh man, like, yeah, I haven't contacted this parent yet. Shame on me, but let me get back to them real quick. I always think that that's a great way to just kind of go in casually. You know, it doesn't have to be like this, you know, like a detailed, like, concern letter, but just a, hey, like, how are things going? What can I do to support you supporting my child right now, especially since things are crazy. And I recognize that things are crazy as a parent or as a teacher and a parent. What can I do? And so that's the first one. I always, because of my students and their disabilities, their parents are always on Google Meets with us. So, you know, if you ever have time to pop in, if you're sitting with your child, you know, and just, hey, teacher, can we meet in a little breakout room for 5 minutes? You know, do you have time to hop in a breakout room or call me for 5 minutes? I would love to just see how things are going. Anything like that, I think, is totally appropriate and a a good way to build a good rapport right now with all the virtual stuff.
So as she meets resistance from, say, the OT, and they say you don't qualify, is it best to follow up with a written email or something asking what are the qualifications and what is my child doing that does not allow them to qualify, and how could they meet the qualifications? Can you do that? And that way it's not a conversation, and that forces them to say, hey, okay, so they have to explain it in terms that she can understand, and she'll have something with her that says, hey, this is what they said, and make them really lay out where the qualifications are and why the child doesn't qualify.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, anytime that there's something happens in a verbal conversation that you don't agree with or that you think needs to be reiterated, it's always a good idea to send a follow-up email. And if you use Gmail, you can actually put read receipts on your Gmail. So when you do an email, there's a way that you can literally turn on a read receipt, so the person never can say, well, I didn't get that email. So that's one trick. But yeah, I think absolutely it's okay to say, per our conversation on such and such date, you stated that my child so-and-so does not qualify for XYZ services or consult. Can you please explain to me what the qualifications are to get access, for somebody to have access to that service or something like that? I think that's absolutely okay. Again, read receipts. If they don't reply, send again and make sure you put in there, per my last email on XYZ date that you didn't respond. You know, yeah. And then print it all out. Print it all out.
They have not yet, they haven't issued a NORAP on their decision for the denial of an IEP or special education yet. I haven't mentioned it because I'm like getting all my stuff together. I'm trying to collect all my data, and I don't want to shorten my timeline, but they still haven't issued the NORAP with their decision, just the report.
Okay.
So I'm getting ready to send that email because, you know, we have to meet eventually. We have to meet eventually. I just don't, I hate the confrontational sit down with 30 people over there and 2 people on this side. It's, you know.
It's hard. Oh yeah.
But they do have to issue a written notice because they've denied it, and that would be in there, all of the things that they are rejecting, or right?
Yeah. So it should be several different notice of actions. There's a controversy, oddly enough, on if you can put multiple rejections or exceptions on one notice of action. So I don't really know if it'll be one or many. It should be many based off what you've told me. It should be several notice of actions, prior written notice, whatever you want to call them, about the services they're denying. And it should have why. So it's got, this is a decision that we're accepting or rejecting. This is why, this is who was involved, and this is what was considered. So I would look very closely at that part, those different parts of the prior written notice, to see why exactly they're rejecting it. And then that could provide you some insight too.
All right. All right. I think you guys have been incredibly helpful. I appreciate this, you know, time afterwards for questions and answers. And Daphne, I'm really sorry if I took up all their time. I mean, you can chime in, I'm sure. I always learn when someone else asks questions too, because I just am like, oh yeah, that's right.
No, don't worry about it. That's why we have Q&A, just to make sure that if you have questions, they get answered, because this is complicated stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you thought that it was helpful. So please find me on Facebook and, you know, connect with me. And if you have any more questions, I'm more than happy to answer and help out. Although it sounds like you have a great advocate. So that is amazing.
That's very lucky.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been amazing.
Yes.
So Jade, we appreciate all your information. And Melissa, feel free, we'll have her information and I'll have all this information from the chat available to you. So I'll try, actually, I'm going to try to make sure if nothing else it gets emailed to you. So we appreciate your time. Thank you for jumping on today and joining us. And hopefully we'll see you for our next webinar.